Good morning and welcome back to the channel. I appreciate you tuning in today. We're going to continue in 2 Samuel, but before we begin, our prayer. Father, as I read and receive your word, may it deeply be rooted in me, so when difficulty comes, it will be your word that encourages and strengthens me. Amen. Chapter 12. Nathan rebukes David. So the Lord sent Nathan, the prophet, to tell David the story. There were two men in a certain town. One was rich and one was poor. The rich man owned many sheep and cattle. The poor man owned nothing, but a little lamb he had worked hard to buy. He raised the little lamb and it grew up with his children. It ate from the man's own plate and drank from his cup. He cuddled it in his arms like a baby daughter. One day a guest arrived at the home of the rich man, but instead of killing a lamb from his own flock for food, he took the poor man's lamb and killed it and served it to his guests. David was furious. As surely as the Lord lives, he vowed, any man who would do such a thing deserves to die. He must repay for lambs to the poor man for the one he stole and for having no pity. Then Nathan said to David, "You are that man. The Lord, the God of Israel, says, I anointed you king of Israel and saved you from the power of Saul. I gave you his house and his wives and the kingdom of Israel and Judah, and if that had not been enough, I would have given you much, much more. Why then have you despised the word of the Lord and done this horrible deed? For you have murdered Uriah and stolen his wife. From this time on, the sword will be a constant threat to your family, because you have despised me by taking Uriah's wife to be your own. Because of what you have done, I, the Lord, will cause your own household to rebel against you. I will give your wives to another man, and he will go to bed with them in the public view. You did it secretly, but I will do this to you openly in the sight of all of Israel." David confesses his guilt. Then David confessed to Nathan, "I have sinned against the Lord." Nathan replied, "Yes, but the Lord has forgiven you, and you won't die for the sin. But you have given the enemies of the Lord great opportunity to despise and blaspheme him, so your child will die." After Nathan returned to his home, the Lord made Bathsheba's baby deathly ill. David begged God to spare the child. He went without food and lay all night on the bare ground. The leaders of the nation pleaded with him to get up and eat with them, but he refused. Then on the seventh day, the baby died. David's advisors were afraid to tell him. He was so broken up about the baby and sick. They said, "What will he do to himself when we tell him the child is dead?" But when David saw them whispering, he realized what had happened. "Is the baby dead?" he asked. "Yes," they replied. Then David got up from the ground, washed himself, put on lotion, and changed his clothes. Then he went to the tabernacle and worshipped the Lord. After that, he returned to the palace and ate. His advisors were amazed. "We don't understand you," they told him. "While the baby was still living, you wept and refused to eat. But now that the baby is dead, you have stopped your mourning and are eating again." David replied, "I fasted and wept while the child was alive, for I said, perhaps the Lord will be gracious to me and let the child live. But why should I fast when he is dead? Can I bring him back again? I will go to him one day, but he cannot return to me." Then David comforted Bathsheba his wife and slept with her. She became pregnant and gave birth to a son, and they named him Solomon. The Lord loved the child and sent word through Nathan the prophet that his name should be Jedediah, beloved of the Lord, because the Lord loved him. David captures Rabbah. Meanwhile, Joab and the Israelites' army were successfully ending their siege of Rabbah, the capital of Ammon. Joab sent messengers to tell David, "I have fought against Rabbah and captured its water supply. Now bring the rest of the army and finish the job, so you will get credit for the victory instead of me." So David led the rest of his army to Rabbah and captured it. David removed the crown from the king's head, and it was placed on David's own head. The crown was made of gold and set with gems. and it weighed about 75 pounds. David took a vast amount of plunder from the city. He also made slaves of the people of Rabbah and forced them to labor with saws, picks, and axes to work in the brick kilns. This is how he dealt with the people of all Ammonite cities. And David and his army returned to Jerusalem. Chapter 13. The Rape of Tamar. David's son Absalom had a beautiful sister named Tamar, and Amnon, her half-brother, fell desperately in love with her. Amnon became so obsessed with Tamar that he became ill. She was a virgin, and it seemed impossible that he could ever fulfill his love for her. Now Amnon had a very crafty friend, his cousin Jonadab. He was the son of David's brother Shimea. One day Jonadab said to Amnon, "What's the trouble? Why should the son of a king look so dejected morning after morning?" So Amnon told him, "I'm in love with Tamar, Absalom's sister." "Well," Jonadab said, "I tell you what to do. Go back to bed and pretend you are sick. When your father comes to see you, ask him to let Tamar come and prepare some food for you. Tell him you'll feel better if she feeds you." So Amnon pretended to be sick, and when the king came to see him, Amnon asked him, "Please let Tamar come to take care of me and cook something for me to eat." So David agreed and sent Tamar to Amnon's house to prepare some food for him. When Tamar arrived at Amnon's house, she went to the room where he was lying down so he could watch her mix some dough. Then she baked some special bread for him, but when she set the serving tray before him, he refused to eat. "Everyone get out of here," Amnon told his servants. So they all left. Then he said to Tamar, "Now bring the food into my bedroom and feed it to me here." So Tamar took it to him. But as she was feeding him, he grabbed her and demanded, "Come to my bed with me, my darling sister." "No, my brother," she cried. "Don't be foolish. Don't do this to me. You know what a serious crime it is to do such a thing in Israel. Where could I go in my shame? And you would be called out one of the greatest fools in Israel. Please just speak to the king about it, and he will let you marry me." But Amnon wouldn't listen to her, and since he was stronger than she was, he raped her. Then suddenly Amnon's love turned to hate, and he hated her even more than he had loved her. "Get out of here," he snarled at her. "No, no," Tamar cried. "To reject me now is a greater wrong than what you have already done to me." But Amnon wouldn't listen. He shouted for his servant and demanded, "Throw this woman out and lock the door behind her." So the servant put her out. She was wearing a long, beautiful robe, as was custom in those days for the king's virgin daughters. But now Tamar tore her robe and put ashes on her head, and then with her face in her hands she went away crying. Her brother Absalom saw her and asked, "Is it true that Amnon has been with you?" "Well, don't be so upset, since he's your brother anyway. Don't worry about it." So Tamar lived as a desolate woman at Absalom's house. When King David heard what had happened, he was very angry, and though Absalom never spoke to Amnon about it, he hated Amnon deeply because of what he had done to his sister. Absalom's revenge on Amnon. 2 years later, when Absalom's sheep were being sheared at Baal-Hazar near Ephraim, Absalom invited all the king's sons to come to a feast. We went to the king and said, "My sheep shearers are now at work. Would the king and his servants please come to celebrate the occasion with me?" No, the king replied, "No, my son. If we all came, we would be too much of a burden on you." Absalom pressed him, but the king wouldn't come, though he sent his thanks. "Well then," Absalom said, "if you can't come, how about sending my brother Amnon instead?" "Why Amnon?" the king asked. But Absalom kept on pressing the king until he finally agreed to let all his sons attend, including Amnon. Absalom told his men, "Wait until Amnon gets drunk, then at my signal kill him. Don't be afraid, I'm the one who's given the command. Take courage and do it." So at Absalom's signal they murdered Amnon, and the other sons of the king jumped on the mules, and fled. As they were on their way back to Jerusalem, this report reached David: "Absalom has killed all your sons, but not one is left alive." The king jumped up, tore his robe, and fell prostrate to the ground. His advisors also tore their clothes in horror and sorrow. But just then, Jonadab, the son of David's brother, Shema, arrived and said, "No, not all your sons have been killed. It was only Amnon. Absalom has been plotting this ever since Amnon raped his sister Tamar. No, your sons aren't all dead. It was only Amnon." Meanwhile, Absalom escaped. Then the watchman on the Jerusalem wall saw a great crowd coming toward the city from the west. He ran to tell the king, "I see a crowd of people coming from the Horonaim road along the side of the hill." "Look," Jonadab told the king, "there they are now. Your sons are coming, just as I said." They soon arrived, weeping and sobbing, and the king and his officials wept bitterly with them. And David mourned many days for his son Amnon. Absalom fled to his grandfather Talmai, son of Ammihud, the king of Geshur. He stayed there in Geshur for 3 years. And David, now reconciled to Amnon's death, longed to be reunited with his son Absalom. Well, thank you for joining me today. We will continue tomorrow with Samuel. And until then, have a great day and have a blessed day. Bye.